Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in today. This episode focuses so much on voice and empowering your own voice. We all have a voice, an opinion that differentiates us from others, from the world, really. We ought to understand and empower our own voices. This is important to stand together as a community. In today's episode, I interview Juniper Waller, a great human and a vocal coach. She shares the stories of trauma and her search for her own voice, and how she continues to empower others to find theirs. Please join me in welcoming Juniper to Fearless, Chapter 2.
There's nothing about this that's normal. There's nothing about this that's fair. There's nothing about this that's normal. It's all right to be scared. There's nothing to make me believe it's gonna be okay. And yet, I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe in you and me and the power of we.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thanks.
Welcome, everyone. I'm here today with Waller. I invited her here for many reasons. Apart from being such a great human being, she's also a singer, songwriter, and a vocal empowerment coach from Oakland, California. And I invited her here, but one of the main reasons why I invited her here is because she supports people to reclaim their voices from past trauma through breathwork. And I was actually really honored and to be a part of her breathwork class. And I wanted to share her work and her story with all of you. So, welcome, Juniper. It's good to have you here.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
So, tell us a little bit more about your work and who you are, and then yeah, we'll go from there.
Like you said, I'm a singer and songwriter, musician, performer, writer, artist person. And so that's a really big part of who I am. Started out in my client work as a vocal coach, just teaching people to sing.
Mm-hmm.
And but I also have a background in herbalism and holistic nutrition and some energy work. And so, and I, through my vocal coaching, started noticing that so many of my clients had these stories about how earlier in their life their voice was bad, right? And that this was really stopping them from being able to sing just for the enjoyment of it, much less for performing, right? And singing is something that's always been really, really important to me, always been a really big part of my healing. And so I want everyone to be able to access that. I believe that it's everyone's right to use their voice to heal themselves for their own enjoyment and fun and for others as well, you know, and believe that our voices have really healing powers. And so I started expanding my vocal coaching to being more about vocal empowerment coaching and healing through the breath and through the voice. And I brought in the breathwork piece as well, because breathwork has been a huge part of my healing journey. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now. I feel like for the first time, my my artist side and my healer side are actually working together in a very nice way. whereas in the past it's been sort of a tension between the two. So that's something I'm really grateful for.
I'm grateful for you and having to take your class. It really changed my way of healing as well. Like, I think that when I took your course, it was in the beginning of my healing process from a lot of different types of trauma. And it was so powerful that
Mm.
it made me cry, and it also made me rejuvenate, and start the process of healing. So thank you so much for doing this
Wow.
work for so many people out there. And I hope people listening to this go ahead and take your class. You mentioned that you're a writer too. So you said your artistry and your healing work is coming together for the first time. So tell us a little bit more about what that means.
Sure. Yeah. So writing's always been a really important part of my life and my identity. And I've always been a journaler. And I know that we have that in common. And I always wrote songs. My mom's a singer-songwriter. So I think that so many children write songs when they're young, but um, for me, I was lucky because my mom is a songwriter and was like, "That's great. I'm gonna write that down," and really encouraged my songwriting. And so I got really into
Mm,
poetry when I was a preteen, and I've also always just enjoyed writing nonfiction stuff too. Like I wrote an article last year called "The Politicization of Breath," kind of linking all the ways in which breathing is politicized, from environmental racism to COVID-19, and the ways in which that disproportionately affects communities of color and low income people. And also, brought in police chokeholds and the rallying cry of
mm,
"I can't breathe," right? We can't breathe. That was so much a part of 2020 and of the last 10 years, the Black Lives Matter movement. And I don't publish often, right? I don't write things to be published often. My main writing is through my songwriting and just my own journaling practice, daily journaling practice. I don't have a very good memory, and it's very hard for me to keep track of the things that have happened to me and the
mm,
things that I've done. And it's a challenge to track my own progress
mm,
without journaling. And the times in my life where I wasn't journaling are the darkest, most confusing
mm.
periods of my life, looking back on them. When I started writing poetry, like as a
Sure.
young teenager, um, I remember I thought I could actually tell the future through my poetry because it was so startling to me how I would write straight from the muse, right? I would write kind of unconsciously, just writing what was flowing through me. And then 2 weeks later, or a month later, or a year later, or what have you, I'd look back on that and be like, damn, that was hella
Mm,
true, like that thing came true. Um, and it's because we're tapping into like
mhm.
a deeper knowing, when we're writing in that way.
Yeah, that is powerful, right? Because journaling is definitely a form of healing, and it's a form of like
Yes.
bringing or expressing yourself. And also, when you journal, I feel like there are things that come out on paper that you never really thought about, or um, there are things that come out that you didn't even know you were going through, and especially through poetry and journaling. And I think that's so important in terms of healing. And so, when did you start journaling? How old were you?
I started journaling when I was like 12, and I have journals from before that too, where I'd keep it for a few days, and then fall off, and I'd be like, "This is my new journal. I'm going to write everything that happens here," and then and then there's nothing else in the notebook. But yeah, it was when I was 12. I started journaling every day. I just started writing, like the mundane happenings of a 12-year-old. But then what wasn't mundane is I went to Europe with my family. And so I was like, okay, now I really need to journal because this is exciting. This is interesting. I'm going to write down everything that happens. And that was when I really started keeping a journal was it was like a travel journal, and then when I came home, I continued with that. That was boring. I'm sorry. I just talked
No, but
about
that's
that for
interesting,
too
right?
long.
The evolution of your journaling, it started as a travel journal. Well, first you had a lot of blank journals.
Hmm.
Um, then you started with a
Hmm.
travel journal, and then that's you just started
Hmm.
recording your life that way. And was it a recording of your life, or was it like today I woke up and I brushed my teeth, or like how did what types of? I mean, you probably don't remember because you just said you have a bad memory, but like, what were some?
No,
Oh,
but I
you
have the
do.
journals. So, oh yeah, I have that journal from
Wow.
when I
Do
was
you read it
12.
often?
Not often, but
Mm,
I have read it. And it's funny because it's like, I mean, to get to go to
I
Europe when you're
know.
12 is very awesome, right? And but it's just funny because you're still 12. You're still kind of like like where is your mind? And so it's part like we went to Anne Frank's house and we cried and it was so beautiful and oh my God, and I'm leaning out the hotel window and I can tell that these church bells that I'm hearing are the same church bells that Anne Frank wrote about because we're just a few blocks away from the secret annex. And, you know, that was in Amsterdam, and like that's a really profound realization, right? And I'm like, and I'm pretty much the same age as her, and here I am writing in my diary, and you know, um, as a young Jewish girl to like be having that experience was like
Right.
kind of a big deal,
Very.
kind of deep, right? And then at the same time, I'm like, my sister won't stop whining, and my stepdad wants me to blah, 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 and just like being 12. So it's such an interesting window into that brain
It
that I
is.
had.
And I think it's also even interesting when you read it back, when you're an adult and you start reading that, it takes you back to that time when you were 12 and you were going through all of these, or you were thinking all of this stuff. And, sometimes, I don't know about you, but, when I read my older journals, I think that, it takes me back to that time, but also things that I didn't record in my journal, right? Takes me back to that time where I
Hmm.
would write certain things down, but there were things that did not want to write down that were more painful.
Totally.
Yeah,
The editing.
yeah,
Yes. There were more right. And the things we didn't want to encounter again in those pages, the things we just
right,
wanted to forget.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So the last time we talked about your journaling, you said that you journal a lot, you wrote in your diary a lot, and then you took it to school or high school one day, and then someone found it, and that was
That was
oh
right
wow,
after I got back from Europe. And and so that was my first journal that I ever in earnest was journaling daily. Um, that I got back from Europe and I turned 13. And so this was seventh grade. And one of the other kids stole my journal out of my backpack and passed it around to the whole class for like 2 weeks. And I just didn't know. I couldn't find it. I'd started a new journal. I was just like, I don't know where I lost my journal, but hopefully somewhere safe. Hopefully it's under my bed. I can't find it. It was not somewhere safe. It was like being
that's
passed
horrible.
around the whole class. Um, and in true, 1999 style, I found out on a
Mhm.
three-way phone call, right? Like classic.
Friends.
So that I laugh, but that was
Oh,
so traumatizing. I mean, and I think when I told you about that, when we first talked about it, I was really like, oh, it was so stupid. It was like Harriet the Spy, so stupid, da da da. Because yeah, my whole life I've kind of been like, that is not a legitimate thing
mhm.
to be traumatized over. But in my healing journey, I've come to realize that was the most traumatizing thing that's ever happened to me. Even though much worse capital T traumatizing things have happened, before that and after that, for some reason, that was the thing, because it was a level of, I think, betrayal and vulnerability that I just couldn't handle at that time,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know?
So sorry to bring back
Mhm.
your trauma, but
No, no, let's do it.
okay.
We're doing it. I'm
Okay.
ready.
I mean, you said you're on a three-way call. So was the three-way call with your friends or just people you knew at school? And how did they tell you? And yeah, how did it happen?
Well, and this is the part that makes me roll my eyes the most, right? Is in the journal I talked about the boy in the
Mm,
class that I had a crush
mm,
on, right? And so I was on the phone with his best friend, and his best friend was starting to allude to knowing things about me that he shouldn't know about me. And he's like, I know you have a crush on him, da da da. I was like, how do you know that? How do you know these things? And he's like, well, I read something you wrote. And I was like, something I wrote? What? I had no idea, right? I was just so clueless. Something I wrote? What did I write? Like a note or something? And then it dawned on me. I was like, oh my
oh,
God, you have my diary. And then I heard a third voice come in that said, bingo.
oh
And
my
it was my
gosh.
crush.
Wow.
I know. I know my little baby
Oh my
heart just
goodness. And
broke
so,
in so many pieces. And I remember I dropped the
mm,
phone and screamed, you know? It was really like this moment of just like my innocence just shattered on the floor.
right. And yeah, and
I don't know.
did you
Yeah.
ask questions after that when you went to, I'm sure you were just traumatized and scared to even go to school the next day. I can't even imagine what that was like.
You're sweet. Thank you for for going there with me. Yeah, it was I remember, yeah, that I didn't want to go to school. My mom said I had to go to school, and my response, once it, I think at first I tried to kind of go and make nice, and then it became clear that no, I had been chosen as the sacrificial lamb, right? Like, and then that's how kids that age are, right? They have to choose someone who's the bad one, who's the one that
Mm,
gets picked on, and then they all turn on that kid, right? And so when it became clear that that was me, and um that I wasn't gonna, you know, have friends anymore, I really I wanted to resist. I have this very rebellious side of me. I have this very like I hate authority. I hate, I hate being told what to do. And I hate being put in a position where I feel like my back's against the wall. I want to be in charge of at least myself, right? And my fate. And so I lashed out, and the ways that I lashed out were
mm,
I kept writing. So I very stubbornly kept journaling publicly
mm,
in class, right? Just like scribbling in my journal. And I went out into the kind of the area beyond the playground, which was very
mhm,
woodsy. And I
mm.
cast spells. I would like set up an altar on a tree trunk, and I would just like
Wow.
go full witch on everybody and sing really loudly. This did not help my reputation for like fitting in as a 13-year-old, but I didn't care anymore. And I got in a lot of trouble. Suddenly, I had all these behavioral problems where I got in fights and I got in just like altercations with other kids. I was always in the principal's office. And eventually, the adults in the situation decided that the problem was that I was writing in my journal at school and that I shouldn't be allowed to write at school anymore. That was the that was the solution to this problem.
What a
So,
ridiculous, I'm sorry. Well, what a ridiculous solution by these school administrators.
not crazy. It's so cruel,
It
right?
is.
And
It's
misguided.
definitely cruel,
Yeah.
but also a little. nuts that the adults, like that the adults who have a lot more experience than these kids in life in general decided that you should stop writing and and writing your thoughts down on paper, which is a huge form of healing. And
Yeah,
taking that away from you, it's like taking away part of your soul.
I think that's well put. And I think that it really speaks to the lack of understanding of how young people know how to heal themselves a lot of the time. Like, and I think that we get that kind of beaten out of us in society, and this is a great example of one way in which
Right.
that can happen, right? Is we have strategies to self-soothe. We have strategies to heal ourselves. The breath and the voice and writing are three of those things that we just, the breath and the voice are things we're born with, right? And then writing is a tool that we develop as we grow and learn. And I intuitively knew that I needed to go be in nature. I needed to sing. I needed to write. I needed to metabolize this trauma through my body, right? And I didn't have any teaching about that. No one had taught me about that, but I felt the need to beef up my spiritual life, right? But so these were like good
Yeah,
ideas that I
great
had,
idea.
right? Like I was traumatized, I was betrayed. I'm going to sing about it. I'm going to pray about it, meditate about it, whatever version of that I was doing that I made up. I'm going to write about it and I'm
Right.
going to work through this. And and like, yeah, my attempts to do that were thwarted by the adults in this situation. And that's just classic. I think that is, I think that happens in different forms to kids all
It
the
really
time.
does. And it's unfortunate,
Yeah.
that it does happen to kids all the time, and that really shapes their future and then shapes their core when it really shouldn't. We as adults should be placing like positive ways and strategies on how to coach our kids to understand themselves better, because I think that's what it really boils down to. They could have asked you questions like, what's going on? Is everything okay? Versus like analyzing your behavior and telling you what you should be doing, right? Versus understanding who
Right.
you are and coaching you um, in toward growth. I
Yeah.
think it's pretty commendable that you were so intuitive and you knew exactly what you needed to do in that moment while you were going through all of these different types of feelings when your journal got stolen, and then not only did it get stolen, it got passed around, and not only did it get passed around, but it ended in your crush's hands, who felt the need to tell his best friend, and both of them together called you. I think it's, whew, that's a whole lot of bullying, right there. And I think it's beyond bullying too. But thank you for sharing that story. And after that, did you, I mean, I know that they took away your diary, but did you continue writing?
Yes, I did. I continued writing pretty much from there on out. I have really thorough journals from high school. Through high school, it was a big tool for me. Yeah.
That's great. I was gonna say that you talked about, the different themes of your and of spirituality came out when you said you were casting spells. What do you define as what is a spell, first of all? And why do you think that you were casting those spells apart from your singing and your screaming maybe and being in the woods, like what affected, how did you think to even create an altar? That's my question at that age.
Well, I did have a book. I did have a book called
Mhm.
Teen Witch.
Mm.
So that was one that and I think it was kind of a thing during that time frame because I've talked to other women my age who also had like a Wicca phase and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a Wicca phase, but I definitely have always been a really spiritual person and very much not a religious person. And I've always kind of found my own ways to communicate with my higher power in various different forms throughout my life. And so, and it's always been a very strong connection to nature, right? And so that was just what I felt intuitively like I needed to do during that time, right? Was to go and sit with some trees and tell them about my problems, right? And that's always been something I've done. To your question about what are spells, and um, so I don't prescribe to any one tradition or religion. So my definition of that is definitely not going to align with the next person's necessarily. But I know that there's one definition of magic that is changing consciousness at will. And I like that one. And to me, a spell is about healing, right? It's not about creating something you want or changing an outcome. I don't believe in trying to
Mm-hmm.
change outcomes. But I do believe in trying to change my consciousness about a situation, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
that's all I can control. When I can sort of change my mindset or approach to something while honoring my emotions, right? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
not about bypassing, definitely not about bypassing. But it's about meeting myself where I'm at and then supporting myself through that, right? So that I can show up in a more empowered way and so that I can show up to be of greater service to the whole, right? And so I definitely didn't have that analysis of what I was doing when I was 13, but I did know that the people around me in that time couldn't
Mm-hmm.
see my goodness. They couldn't see my strength. They couldn't see my contribution to the group, right? And I knew that I was worthy of more and better. And as I grew older, especially in high school, I lost sight of my goodness. I lost sight of my worthiness. Like so many young girls, people socialized as girls, people who are femme, you know, that happens to us around that age that we lose sight of our own goodness. And that definitely happened to me. And I definitely, fell victim to the idea that I wasn't good enough, that I was bad, right? And then a big part of my story is that I'm in recovery from alcohol and drugs, and that happens to so many artists, so many intuitives. It's really common because I believe that that's because there isn't, and I hope this is changing. We definitely hope that this is changing, but there just isn't enough of a widespread enough belief in our society that those of us who are softer and quieter and more in touch with the creative and the natural and the softer, that we have inherent worth, right? So yeah, I knew something when I was 13 that I went on to forget for a very long
Yeah,
time.
that is
But
profound, right? That you had that experience at 13. And perhaps that also, without that experience, you probably, you never know of what would, how you would have turned out in high school if without that experience. We can never really know that because it never really happened. But I think that your
right,
intuition at that time was to heal. And I like how you said that, the people at the time did not see your goodness, right? And then you eventually lost your goodness, or you got lost. Thank you for
yeah,
sharing your
yeah.
experiences with us, and your recommendations with adults who have kids. or teaching kids or coaching kids or yeah, it's a lot. I'm sorry that you had to go through that at the age of 13.
Thank you for holding space for me to talk about it. I've certainly never talked about that story publicly. And I think I've only told like a handful of people that
Wow, I'm
story in my
honored.
life. So
Thank you.
it's nice.
Um, and I'm so
Mhm.
glad that so like you said, you stopped for a long time. So after elementary school, you stopped, you got lost, a bit. When did you start finding yourself again? And was that when you started, breath work and teaching and singing again, or how did you find yourself again?
So what happened was I went to New York for college. I was writing, I was feeling really creative. When I first got to college, I was like, I made it through high school. I'm gonna be okay. And then I had a political awakening, as so many people do in college, right? And I started learning about social movements and about just kind of had my matrix moment, right? Where my eyes opened and I was like, holy shit, the whole world is based around this capitalist, imperialist, white
Mhm.
supremacist heteropatriarchy. And that happened to me at
Mhm.
19, right? That I awakened to this and I was like, I can't just be an artist and sit on my ass and write poetry. I have to go fix this shit. So I kind of changed my whole what I was studying, what I was doing in my free time, and I became a very like stompy booted activist and moved to New York City and just threw myself into it. And that was it for the next like 8 years. I became a legal worker and I worked with uh, two different civil rights law firms where we basically just either represented people who were trapped or wrongfully accused by the NYPD or people who had been beat up or sometimes the families of people who had been killed by the NYPD. And like I was just always in and out of jails, visiting clients, serving papers to the cops. All the cops knew me and hated me. If I walked through the door, I was serving them papers. And that felt really good to me for a while because I was really angry and it felt like a effective way of channeling my anger, right, to the people that I was angry at. The thing is, I'm a really sensitive person, and doing that work, I had to build up a really strong defense around myself, really big shell. And I think there's a lot of amazing people who are doing that legal work and activists in general, right, who have huge hearts and are able to kind of have boundaries and do that work healthily. But I also think there's a lot of people who are very sensitive and build up defenses around themselves in order to be able to engage with that work. And I was one of those people, and so that's sort of how I got pretty far away from myself, was building up these really, really strong defenses. And drinking had a lot to do with it, right? And a lot of activists that's another group of people that are often fall prey to addiction because it's hard, you know? I burnt out,
Mhm.
right? We all know about burnout now. It's become, uh, you know, much more mainstream to talk about burnout and how dangerous it can be and um, but back then in 2012 when I burned out really hard, we weren't talking about it as much, and so but I knew that was what it was, and I came back to California and I just was like, I need to you know, get back to my roots, my home, nature. Just need to chill out a little bit, need to heal. And I went and studied herbalism. I was like, I want to. I want to be part of the solution in like a healing way, not like in a fighting way, you know? And that was kind of my, it was oversimplified. And that wasn't right for me either, because I was so disillusioned with which I mean, and now we're all aware that there's like this very kind of racist spiritual bypassing track that runs through the kind of the white healer circles, right? And so I wanted nothing to do with that, you know. I wanted to learn herbalism because the systems of oppression that exist in the world are a public health crisis, and I want, you know, so that was like where I was coming from with this view. And then there were these people over here that just are in their little uh, white bubble, and I felt lost because I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. I felt like I have a lot of energy and interests and a big heart, and I didn't know where to direct all of that, you know. And so I went and worked in a grocery store, and I went and was a barista, you know, and just like kind of just checked out of a lot of that stuff. And but the good thing about that time was I started singing again, and I started writing songs again and reconnecting with my artist self. It took a few more years. I really had to spin out for a few years, which resulted in getting sober. And I'd say that's when I really came back to myself, was when I got sober in October of 2018. You know, I'd just been running from myself for so long, and I'd just been running from my emotions and the sensations in my body and my intuition and my creativity and my dreams, you know, my actual dream self. I'd been running from my inner self. And when I got sober, I had no choice but to face that and do my shadow work, like we talked about. And that's when I was able to kind of like let all these parts of myself meet each other and integrate. And obviously, I'm still in that
It's, I
process.
mean, I think it's a lifelong process, right? And it's continuous improvements and continuous learning about ourselves and our healing. We're healing every day. We're getting traumatized every day. Um, we just need to understand
Yeah.
ourselves better in terms of like how to navigate through that trauma. So thank you for sharing your story. That's it's a long journey, and you know your work that you did in New York. Wow, that's amazing. You're amazing. You did that work for other people, and you still are. You know, in different ways. You were healing people back then, and you're healing people right now. It's just in a different form. And tell us a little more about your breathwork class. I mean, not just for me, but for the world out there, because I experienced it and it was super powerful. I think I like had these it's insane hallucinations. I don't know if they're hallucinations, but it was I felt like I was in these hallucinations, but it was sort of dreaming, but it wasn't because I was awake. So, but it
Hmm.
was so powerful.
Yeah.
So share with the world, about this program, and I think it was super good for me. After that, I was just in a daze for a while. I was like, what just happened? Did I go out to outer space and back? It really did feel like that.
That's cool. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I definitely get a lot of visualizations also when I do breath work, and I love that about it. Type of breath work that I practice doesn't have an official name. It's a three-part breath that everything happens through the mouth, and we do this breathing technique for about 25 to 30 minutes, followed by a meditation relaxation period. I do a monthly class called Breathwork for Collective Liberation, and it's the second Saturday of every month at 4 p.m. Pacific time on Zoom. And so people come from all over the world. I also do one-on-one breath work with people, which is also cool in its own way, because it's more targeted to the individual. But there's something really special about doing breath work in a group, even on Zoom. I feel like at the end of every class, everyone kind of feels like they've been through a journey together, even if they never turned on their video or never turned on their mic. It's cool like that. But yeah, so breath work has been such a healing modality for me, because so we talked about shadow work, we've talked about writing and journaling, and then for me, other stuff I've done in my journey is step work. The 12 steps have been huge for me for kind of noticing my patterns and shifting them. Um, and therapy, there's so many strategies that we have to kind of work through, process through our trauma and our habits, and to kind of examine and try to make improvements. But the thing about breath work is it kind of takes all that work that we're doing and allows us to release it physically, right? And so I think that this is something that can be achieved through dance, sometimes through sports, right? The body holds the trauma, and we need to allow the body to release the trauma, right? And if we don't, it doesn't go away. We can talk about it all we want, but that doesn't mean it's going to be released until we allow our body to release it. And I think that breath work is the most direct route to that I've ever found. So that's the number one thing for me about breath work. Yeah, it's great for people who aren't good meditators, who have trouble kind of letting go, trouble, and I think that's all of us to some extent, but there's some folks who just like they can't shut their mind up. When I left New York and was like, I'm gonna go to California and be a healer, like when I did that, my thought process was that I had burnt out, right? I needed healing. And I was running around New York City trying to find healing, right? So I'd like go up to the Upper East Side to meet my friend for her favorite yoga class. And at that yoga class, it was just this room full of rich white women, like, leave your worries at the door, and just like this whole kind of idea that like it was possible to just let go of everything you were stressed out about and just enjoy an hour and a half of yoga. And I couldn't do that. I was like, no, people are dying. Like I can't just forget about that to come to this expensive yoga class. That doesn't work for me, and now we have this term of spiritual bypassing, right? It's like actually puts a name to that. And so when I came back to California and decided to be a healer, I wanted to find a way to support folks who were engaging in the important work that needs to be done to end oppression, who needed healing for themselves, but who couldn't just leave their worries at the door, right? I wanted to find a way to bring healing into those spaces, and I'm still working on figuring out how to do that. But part of my dream is that I want to be able to, especially when things open back up, I want to be able to go to a group of people who are working together for justice in whatever way that they are doing that, and get them all to lie down together in a room and do breath work together, right? Like that's part of my vision. That's what I want to do. I think, when I was Occupy Wall Street, I was deeply involved in that whole shenanigan. And I think about what if we'd had a breathwork practitioner come in, and what if we could have all just laid down on the ground and done that for half an hour? Would we have been able to treat one another better? Would we have been able to solve more of the problems that we were working through in that space? And would we have been able to maintain friendships and maintain that level of, not that level, but some level of activism? So many people that were involved in Occupy Wall Street with me are just traumatized, so traumatized, cannot, we have this whole text thread where we talk about oh, I want to go down to the Black Lives Matter protest, but every time I think about it, my body just says no, right? And the trauma of being an activist in the streets is very real, right? That's something that we can process through with breath work so that we can continue showing up. But if we just, try to keep forcing ourselves to do things that are traumatizing without healing from them, then we're going to reach a point where we just can't do it anymore. And so it's really for the long-term sustainability and longevity of our movements that we have to do this self-care work, right? And that's something that I think is starting to be talked about a lot more, which is amazing. Um, because the people that are the most willing to like put their bodies on the line and be in the streets and fighting are also the people that are going to be the last to say, yeah, I need a day
Wow.
off, I need a self-care day, right? So we like to like
Right.
bring that to
Exactly.
them.
I love that. And I'm hoping that once we do open up, I get to experience that with you too in your class and what you're doing for people out there. I think it's much needed. Like you said, now more than ever, and we're gonna always need activists in our world because I know change doesn't happen automatically. Change only happens when we ask for it, right? So thank you for doing this work. It's beautiful and powerful. And we are going to wrap up today, and I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your stories with me, sharing what you do in breath work with the world. So do you have a favorite quote or a favorite book that you want to end with, or just, just say whatever you want to say to end with?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and for guiding us through such a cool conversation. And
Mm.
thank you for your work and for this
Oh,
beautiful podcast. I'm really
thank
excited
you.
about it.
Great. Thanks so much for being here and talking to me today. I got to know you a little better, and it was a pleasure and honor to get to know you. And I'm hoping that we can stay forever friends. Thanks for listening, y'all. It's because of listeners like you, I'm able to empower others and do what I do. It's because of podcast guests like Juniper, I'm empowered to share these stories with you. Each and every one of you inspire me. If you enjoy this episode, please feel free to share with your family, friends, colleagues, random people you meet. No, I'm just kidding. But no, really, I hope you are empowered to share these stories with your world. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you liked this episode. Until next time, stay fearless.